out tonight, it's a bit warmer than it is now. So instead of taking a stroll outside, we decide it's better to stay in the air conditioning. There's a heat wave coming, you don't want to go out. And when you go out to the Hudson and look across to New Jersey, the water seems a bit higher, a bit closer to where it stands today. And that's because it's risen 3, more likely 6 feet. Now that's okay on a calm evening like this one, but when the storms roll in every few years, the entire neighborhood is flooded, costing billions of dollars in damage and having lives lost. For you, climate change has become an everyday natural disaster. It's become too real to think of it as an abstract anymore. So in the spirit of democracy that has somehow survived over the past 100 years, the city of New York has called a vote to decide what our future should be. Should we as a community protect in place in our neighborhood? Should we build levees and seawalls and try to withstand the tides for a few more years? Or do we relocate? Do we move somewhere else, stop pouring money into the sea, and accept the inevitable reality that we live on an island and the seas are rising? So let's vote by a show of hands. How many are in favor of protecting in place, of building higher levees around our neighborhoods? All right, and by a show of hands, how many think that we should relocate, find somewhere that is higher and drier? Further inland off the island. In the village of Shishmaref in Alaska, they didn't have to wait another 80 years for this vote to happen. It already has. In August of last year, in a 94-78 decision, the village of Shishmaref decided to relocate further inland, leaving their lives, their histories, their homes behind in search of higher land. Shishmaref is located here on a barrier island in the Chukchi Sea. It's about 5 miles off of the mainland of Alaska. The 600 mainly Inupiat residents have lived here for over 400 years, living a subsistence-based lifestyle of hunting, fishing, and berry picking. Now, erosion on the island where Shishmaref sits is nothing new. Like the hurricanes that occasionally come down the East Coast, they've lived with it for centuries. But global warming is happening twice as fast as the global average in the Arctic. That means that the air and sea temperatures around Shishmaref are warming twice as fast and melting ice and thawing the very ground where the village sits. Now, in normal years, ice surrounds the island, so that when fall storms roll in, those big waves crash miles out. But with all of that heat, there is no ice to stop the storms. So when storms roll in, it hits onto people's homes. Now, when fall storms come, every year Shishmaref loses 3 to 5 feet of land. A single storm can take away 50 feet. For Shishmaref, the reality that we just introduced for New York City in 2100 is already happening. So they decided to relocate further inland. They began that process last year of deciding where to relocate, and they will continue that process further and further. Now, all too often, when we think about climate change, it's usually a distant reality. It's about stories like this that we can read in the New York Times or pictures of polar bears. For most New Yorkers, nowadays it's Trump doing something to the Environmental Protection Agency or another climate policy and us reading about it on our phones in the newspaper. It's a concern, yes, but it's a distant concern, one that doesn't disrupt our lives. But climate change is an American story. It's all of our story. It is one that is already intimately disrupting the lives of Americans across our country, and it's one that we should know beyond the headlines because it is and will affect us all, and we all have a part to play in adapting our neighborhoods to the effects of climate change we can no longer avoid. Over the past year and a half, I've been traveling across the United States and U.S. territories as a National Geographic explorer to refocus America's climate change story on the people who are living on our front lines. Together with my research partner, we're creating a database of hundreds of interviews from coastal communities across the country to better understand what is needed today at the national level to support towns like Shishmaref, their need of adaptation and relocation in the next few decades. And what I find in those interviews might surprise you, because yes, people talk about the threats to their property and their infrastructure, but they quickly move past that to instead talk about how they are afraid that a warming world is going to disrupt their cultures, going to ruin their historic sites, going to affect their languages, their family traditions, their identities beyond the point of recognition. So let's stop and think about that for a second, because I can stand up here and talk about the ice that I no longer see in my work in the Arctic, and you'll say that's horrifying, but why should I care in New York City? So instead, I want you to think about who you are. More specifically, I want you to think about the places that have defined who you are. That could be somewhere around here, Washington Square Park. It could be the Bronx Zoo. It could be the New School or a historic building in this neighborhood. But I want you to think of somewhere that is important to you and important to who you become today. The people there, the experiences that you've had. For me, I'm thinking of a shore town, Belmar. It's where my aunt lives and where I spent my summers for as long as I can remember. It's where I had my first job and where I first learned to surf. It's where my parents met on 13th Ave many years ago, and where my nieces and nephews are now just learning to boogie board and getting mouthfuls of sand on every wave. It's a place where friends and family have supported me throughout my whole life. Does everyone have their Belmar that they're thinking of? I see nods, yeah. Erase that from your memory. No longer can you not only never go back to that place, but you'll never be able to share it with anyone else in your life. Not your friends, not your family, your grandchildren. You can't go back to that place. How's everyone feeling? Yeah, if you're feeling like me, not that great. Too often we, as Americans, forget that places define us. We're mobile. We go off to college or move somewhere for a job. We get lost in the melting pot of cities. All that mobility is a good thing. It exposes us to change and makes us adaptive to future changes. But in all of that mobility, all of that movement, there will always be those places that matter most to us that we can go back to. I can always go back to Belmar, to my friends and family there. That will not always be the case. There will come a time in the not so distant future that many of those places will be affected beyond the point of saving because of a warming world. When we think about climate change, intangible cultures, historic sites, our own personal histories, aren't the first things that come to mind. What we picture are things that we can see, the physical destruction, the house that's ripped apart, the subway that gets flooded, the roller coaster that gets stranded in the ocean. This is what we picture when we think about the effects of climate change. But each of these places holds a personal history or a historic history for us, for our communities. There are many intangibles that get lost when roller coasters get stranded in the sea. And those things can't get rebuilt. The garden that my grandfather taught me how to plant tomato plants in, it gets too salty and I can't share that with my children or my grandchildren. The close-knit bonds of your neighbors that you ask to water your plants when you go away, when your community starts to break up because the water keeps going, those bonds no longer exist. Your identity as a coastal community, as a place close to the ocean that has lived with it, gets lost when you are forced to retreat inland. These are the things that people talk to me about when I ask what they are afraid of losing to climate change. Not just in Alaska, but across the country. In American Samoa, I was shown pillboxes from World War II, one of their local historic sites, that are now 10 feet out into the water that used to be on land. I was shown fales, community gathering places like this, where people come together to speak, to share ideas that get flooded with every storm. In Miami, in Little Haiti, I was told about climate gentrification, where communities that are moving further inland from the coastlines as sea level rise are displacing people on high ground and are afraid of losing their cultural centers. And in Louisiana, I was shown historic sites of communities that had to let their land go to the Gulf Coast as their shorelines were disappearing into the Gulf of Mexico. This was the site of Huanashan, but they have had to move further inland behind the levees and abandon what was once a thriving community of hundreds of people. I'm going to show you a short film of a community closer to where we are in the Chesapeake Bay. It's on Smith Island. Has anyone been out to the Chesapeake Bay? Just by a show of hands. So Smith Island is about a 2-hour boat ride into the bay, and it's a wonderful community that has been there before our country became the United States. It has a unique dialect that has been around for 200 years and important historic sites from the War of 1812. Their community will be displaced within my lifetime. They will have to move further inland because of shoreline erosion and sea level rise, and they know it. And while you listen to this short video, I want you to think about the place that I asked you to conjure up just a few minutes ago when I was talking about Belmar. And think about how you would feel if you knew that that place, that building, that neighborhood, that park was going to be lost to sea level rise within your lifetime.
This is a solitude place. Haven't you noticed? Do you see a cop on the island? No. Because we don't want them. You see crime on the island? Hey, did a bank get robbed yesterday? No. You know, what can you lose? Uh-oh, here comes a train. Hear it? Woo, woo, woo. This area right here, you're in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay. As kids, man, we tracked all through this marsh and all. We know where to sink up to here and we're not safe. I've seen it up like 4 foot, 3 foot. Yeah, it's been in my eyes. I mean, I sit here and watch it come in. I don't leave. And then they used to go leave and then come back to disaster. I bury people over here. I built them the last home on earth. I may be the last of the ones doing it because there's no one else left. So we could be the last of the Mohegans around here.
If there's one takeaway from my travels across our shorelines, it is that climate change is, at its core, a story about how environmental shifts are affecting the ways we come to understand and live in the world. It's about the fear that we could lose the very things that make us who we are. Places like Smith Island and Shishmaref may be the first that will be faced with difficult decisions about whether to stay and defend or retreat inland, but they won't be the last. By the end of this century, at least 414 towns, villages, and cities will be partially underwater, no matter how much we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions today. That equates to 4.3 million Americans being displaced by sea level rise, more extreme storms, and shoreline erosion. And that's on the low end of NASA's sea level rise predictions. At the high end, over 13 million of us will embark on a great migration inland, leaving behind not only our homes, but our historic sites, our neighborhoods, our personal histories. That includes us right here in New York City. Now what you see here is only sea level rise predictions. But because the water is much closer and much warmer, that means that any hurricane that comes in is far more intense than any hurricane we have witnessed today. So what you see here that's underwater now is only on a calm day like today. Even with a mild hurricane, it'll flood far more than what we see in normal storms this year. So at the start of this talk, I said that climate change is an American story, and all of us have a part to play in adapting our neighborhoods to the effects. So that leaves the question, what can we do? I'm going to present 3 things that we can do here in New York City, and hopefully we can use the rest of the time to have more of a discussion with all of us talking about what you think we should be doing, what can be done in your own communities, and what places matter to you. The first is to use our public spaces as classrooms and living laboratories. Now more than any other time that I've lived in the New York City area, we are using our public spaces to gather and to talk about issues that are important to us and how we can affect change. The same should be done with historic preservation and climate change. There are a lot of really amazing tools out there that can help us engage each other, learn about the impacts of climate change, and move that into how we can protect the places that matter to us. The example that I have up here is called Game of Floods. Game of Floods was created by the Historic Preservation Officer in Marin County, California, Alice Westhoff. He created an interactive board game where community members would come together like this and play out different scenarios for their homes, for their historic buildings, for their historic districts and neighborhoods, about different scenarios in the future and different climate change impacts. So each decision that you made as sea levels rise, as more extreme storms came in, would help you understand what can be saved, what decisions were important in saving those buildings, and what decisions might not have been as useful to protect the places that matter to us. playing Game of Floods in Greenwich Village, or other things like Weathering It Together, which is another great game that was created by the city of Annapolis to engage its community members, are great ways to understand what the threats are to your home, to your neighborhoods, to your park, and have a little fun on the way of learning that. We could advocate to the city of New York and provide input on what's already happening with climate change adaptation and resilience. Just this past April, the city of New York released its resilience guidelines. New York City has a chief resilience officer. Just quickly, by a show of hands, how many people knew that New York City had a chief resilience officer? One person. I agree, they're doing a horrible job of letting people know that this person exists. He is a Lehigh alumni too, which is my undergrad, and I had never heard of him or the fact that New York City had one until I read my alumni magazine. And I work on climate change, so it's not great, but we can meet the city of New York halfway. We could be more active. And now that all of you know that we have a chief resilience officer, he is working to create plans to help the city adapt to things like sea level rise, to more extreme storms. The guidelines that were released in April have no mention of historic sites, of historic districts, of important public spaces. It does not acknowledge anything about cultural heritage. I think that this is a great opportunity, rather than a missed opportunity, for people to get engaged and tell them why historic places matter, why they should be included in resilience planning, that these are really important places to who we are as New Yorkers, and they can't be forgotten as we're making plans. This is just one plan of many that New York City is taking to adapt, to provide resilience to communities. And historic preservation is grossly underrepresented in all of those plans. So maybe in our discussion we can have a conversation about how Greenwich Village could be more engaged and maybe be a leader in providing that input and to have a voice at that table when those decisions are being made. We could also green our neighborhoods. In sustainability, there is both adaptation to the impacts of climate change, but there's also mitigation, reducing our carbon footprint, making sure that our buildings are as green as possible. At the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Preservation Green Lab has lots of programs and projects that can lower your carbon emission in your home and can show how historic buildings can not only thrive in an era of climate change, but can contribute to a low carbon city. The final thing that I want to introduce before I kind of hand it over to you guys so we can start the discussion is to connect to the movement of climate change and historic preservation that's out there, but New York City is not yet a part of. In October of this year, there will be a conference in Annapolis called Keeping History Above Water. It's the second conference that connects climate change to cultural heritage, where hundreds of community members, community leaders come together to talk about what to do to save their communities in coastal cities. How do we mitigate flooding? How do we protect our historic places? And what can we do together to move things forward at the national level and also test things within our neighborhoods to see what works and what doesn't and share it with the rest of the country. New York hasn't been at any of these meetings, but this is, again, a great opportunity to get more engaged, either at the conference itself or on their online knowledge exchange. There's a whole lot of people that are just starting to make the connection between climate change and historic preservation, and it would be great to have the members of the society be part of that movement so we can hear voices from New York and understand what's working and what's not here to make sure that we're helping each other out and moving forward together. So with that, I'm going to hand it over. We could do questions, but also I just want to hear from you guys what your experience has been with climate change and historic preservation. And yeah, just hear from you. So thank you.
The convention in Annapolis that you just showed us, is there local government involved in that, or is that a grassroots type thing?
Yeah, so keeping history above water was originally the idea of Newport, Rhode Island. So a few years back with Hurricane Sandy, Newport, which most of their historic buildings are right on the waterfront, got completely flooded and they lost a lot of historic properties that they're still trying to recover. So that made them think, what can we do to make sure that this doesn't happen again with the next hurricane? And they realized there wasn't anyone leading this movement and there wasn't a lot of information out there. So last year they got about 300 people from across the US together in Newport for the first Keeping History Above Water conference to have a conversation with everyone to see what people were doing, all the way up from FEMA's flood insurance down to historic preservation officers and strong community champions in rural coastal villages. And it was a really amazing opportunity to learn and to see what was needed, which was a lot. So this year, the city of Annapolis, and particularly their historic preservation officer, Lisa Craig, has taken up the helm of Keeping History Above Water, and it's being strongly driven by her and by the city of Annapolis, who cares deeply about their historic sites and what's happening as their sewers are being flooded on high tides, which happens now regularly and affects their historic district and shuts down streets once a month. So they've really taken this up, and that'll be this November. But the hope is that this is an annual gathering of people who care about historic preservation and climate change, and will move across the country to coastal communities that are seeing the impacts, which maybe one day it will be in New York too.
I have a question actually about the games, which are really interesting. I don't know if fun is the right word, but they seem like really useful tools, but they also seem like something, you said the historic preservation officer is the one who kind of like created the game. So I guess maybe I have two questions. One, is the game viewable for us online somewhere? Is there somewhere we can go to see that? And then also, like, I would love for New York to create one of those, but like, who would do something like that? Like, who's got the knowledge necessary to create that same game, but specifically for New York?
So the Game of Floods is available online, so that any community planner, champion, historic preservation officer can download it, and it's really adaptable to many cities. So while it was developed in California, it was actually played for Newport, Rhode Island last year, and it's been played a few times now for different places. So it's really easy to adapt. You just need to find your city and download the map for that, and that's what you use as the game. But I think the second question is a bigger question in who to engage to make sure that you're getting the right information on climate change, because there's only so much you can know when you focus on historic preservation, and climate change is not the top of your list of threats in 2017. And I think that that's a really good opportunity to reach out to places like the Resilience Office in the Mayor's Office, places that are doing this work already, and they could take on the science side, the mapping side of it to help you, which alleviates the workload for both of you, but also gets the right expertise in the room, and maybe jumpstarts a conversation about how you can work together for bigger projects beyond a game for a community.
Thanks.
No, let's wait for the mic. Can you give us some examples, projects that have been done?
Sure. So
That might actually apply to this area.
yes.
We have a relationship.
Sure. So the city of Newport in Rhode Island has a historic building that they acquired a few years ago that is right on the coastline, and it gets flooded in high tides. It's not only in hurricanes, and they've used that as a test laboratory for different types of adaptations and what could work. So I would suggest looking at that. They've tried a few different things, and they're hoping to create kind of a toolkit for how you can adapt historic buildings to hurricanes, where communities often get flooded or get flooded every 10 years. So that has kind of a wide variety of things that they're doing, both to the building itself, how to change the infrastructure without losing the integrity and the historic integrity of the building, but also how do you connect that building to the wider neighborhood, and both of those are on the Keeping History Above Water website, and there are demonstration videos that can show you step by step how you can do this to buildings, and it's on two parts. There's one that's focused more for historic preservation officers, and how you can adapt a building by using grants and a bit more money. But then there's also a video just for homeowners and how you can adapt your own home, and they walk you through the historic building that they acquired, that they've made into this living laboratory, and show you from the windows to the basement what you can do. And I think that's a really amazing education tool that I would highly suggest, and I can give you the site, or we can look at it afterwards, but we'll do a much more elegant way of showing you what you can do by kind of going through each of the steps.
Okay, so you talk about 100 years. My time frame is 25 years. And living in New York City, is there information that's readily available to me, understandable by me, as to what my city looks like 25 years from now?
Yes, so there is a new report that was recently released by the Union of Concerned Scientists, and I'll give that to you. They have a technical report, but they have a non-technical report that goes by photos and by maps that you can see year by year what each city looks like, and they include New York City in that. It's really easy and really understandable, and it focuses on non-scientists, on everyday residents, and from that point of view, which is really great, and it shows you in 10 years time, in 20 years time, so it starts in 2020 and then continues to 2050. There might be one between those and then onwards, so you get a more specific idea of what streets look like, kind of what your entire city looks like, by photos showing you how high the water would be in a hurricane, a 3, right? Which wouldn't be that bad for New York right now, but would be significantly worse by 2030. And so what you can come to expect, what a heat wave would look like, and based on what's happened in the past with heat waves, what you can expect the human effect of having sustained temperatures over 100 degrees for 2 weeks will do to you personally, which is a really kind of relatable way to understand it. So I can give you that afterwards, but I think that that's a good way to get an understanding just of what we can expect in all of our lifetimes.
I was not familiar with the existence of the resilience officer. Are you aware if it's a mayoral affiliation or appointment?
Yeah, so the Chief Resilience Officer is part of a wider international program called 100 Resilient Cities, which is funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. So the Rockefeller Foundation has funded 100 cities across the world to develop resilience roadmaps for their city. And as part of their program, they fund a Chief Resilience Officer to be housed in the mayor's office for 2 or 3 years. And their sole job is to come up with a roadmap for the city, to listen to the city, which it doesn't seem like right now is being achieved, but hopefully over the next 2 years that will be, and to come up with a plan that the city can then implement. So it's housed under the mayor's office, but it's not tied to a specific mayor. And the hope is that by funding it through the Rockefeller Foundation, that it can overcome any political issues and can kind of transcend any of the different bureaucracies that silo cities into only thinking about one thing, but really dedicate their time to talking to everyone from transportation to historic preservation to make sure that they're getting everything.
I would assume that any kind of pressure to be placed on that position would necessitate having more awareness across the city first. So I imagine that's the first step for us to move towards.
Yeah, I definitely think that it would be good to both individually and maybe for the society to, one, voice concern that no one has heard that we have a Chief Resilience Officer, but two, that historic preservation is important for them to listen to you, to other members, to the society, to all of the societies in New York about and what's important and what you saw in Hurricane Sandy that they can address as they're creating the roadmap. So, thank you.
This is gonna sound like a strange phrasing, but do you know what that person has been doing so far? Like, without saying, yeah, in so many words, like what's he up to?
So I don't know what he's been up to. I know it's a relatively new appointment. Other than the resilience guidelines that were released, which are pretty general, and I think might have come primarily from work that was done in the Sandy recovery, and all of the Plan New York City things that came to fruition out of rebuilding. I think a lot of it came from that, so I'm not sure what he's doing, but it would be great to call up the mayor's office and ask that question, because I would like to know the answer too.
We'll let everyone know.
Question for you.
What?
Does this position, this person we're talking about, fall under the interest of our organization?
So, and just making sure everyone heard that, does the officer in question fall under the interest of GBSHP at all? And I think the answer to that is absolutely. I think that in the sense that he is someone who will certainly be advocating for the future of the city, which means advocating for our historic resources. And so many of our historic neighborhoods are in danger of many of these issues, including Greenwich Village and East Village and NoHo. I don't think that any area of the city is exempt from the potential dangers of these issues. So it's definitely something that we want to be talking about as advocates for historic buildings, and also for sustainable cultural heritage and all of those issues that will certainly be affected. I think that it's important for us to be in those conversations. So we're going to look into it more, that's for sure. I'm embarrassed to say that I did not know this officer existed before tonight either, so.
I should also say that the resilience, as it's defined by the Rockefeller Foundation, includes climate change, but is not only about climate change. It's also about the economic vitality of a city. It's about things like gentrification. So it goes resilience. How many people know what resilience is? So resilience is the ability of a system. So for us, it's the system of us. It's New York City, it's Greenwich Village. It is our ability as a community to withstand changes, to withstand shock events. So if you can picture a curve, and we're a ball in the middle of the curve. Greenwich Village is a ball. And when changes happen, that ball goes up and down, right? So we're waving. Our resilience is how far up our ball can go. So there's a line here, and if we pass that line, Greenwich Village doesn't survive. We don't survive the hurricane. We don't survive the economic recession. We bounce too far. So by making ourselves more resilient, we give ourselves more room. So then when a more extreme hurricane or economic depression comes, we're able to bounce back to where we are. So the Chief Resilience Officer, he's expanding, he should be expanding that for climate change events, but also for just big changes that the city will see, has always seen and will see into the future.
Have you seen any increase in general public commitment since Sandy? Has there been any polls or studies that, because I think a lot of presentation is people becoming aware and committed to improvement?
So there's definitely more awareness after Sandy, but there's still the issue of people forgetting after a few years that there's a high awareness and a high retention rate in the 2 years after a storm hits in our rebuilding, but unless you're in Staten Island and had to have a buyout and leave, or are on the Jersey Shore and you haven't had your house rebuilt, then your engagement with climate change, unless you were already engaged, it's less likely that you'll still be in it, in the movement, in working on climate change. And part of what I think I was trying to get out with asking all of you to imagine somewhere that you care about and thinking about climate change not as a storm that destroys a house, but thinking about it as something that is eroding who we are and who our families will be and what we want to share with them, is the idea that this isn't just one storm that we care a lot about and then we move on. It's something that affects far more than just our building. It's about Greenwich Village, right, as a neighborhood, as a community that might not be there anymore. And it's something that gets exacerbated by storms, but that's only one shock event in a much longer personal, generational history about what climate change can do. So hopefully by rethinking what climate change means to us, we can think about things beyond engaging after the next Sandy that will hit New York City in the future.
I want to add to that because I want to appreciate that thought a little deeper, because I think that's part of the resistance that people have to climate change, that they think it's only about property loss. But really what we're talking about is loss of a community, on a very personal level, and a displacement of people. And when you said that about like 4 million people being, completely displaced and losing their homes and that history and generational attachment, that's really impactful. So I was just wondering about, turning the message around a little bit more and bringing it back to the personal and bringing it back to a community level and and how people in your field are trying to maybe take that approach in terms of, especially with our current administration, thinking it's just about science or, you know, they're not connecting it to the personal.
Yeah, so it's a huge issue on our part, people who are involved in climate change. In a recent poll, it was shown that 70% of people in America believe climate change is happening and affecting people around the world, but less than 30% believe that it was impacting them, their families, and their communities personally. So there's a huge disconnect with thinking about climate change as something that is abstract, that is something that's connected to one storm that we forget about, 4 years after Sandy? Not long. And thinking about it as something that is impacting us with more heat waves, or if you're out west, more forest fires, things that are happening a lot more. And that means changing the story. It means changing the conversations that we're having that we haven't been having as climate change researchers, as climate change advocates. So it's definitely an issue, but it's one that people are starting to turn around. And the report that I mentioned before from the Union of Concerned Scientists tries to do that. Where they make it more about individuals, they make it more about neighborhoods. And I think if we keep just having conversations instead about how climate change is impacting the country, climate change is impacting the world, how climate change is impacting me and you, and what we did last weekend that we might not be able to do in 10 years, and we can't do with our kids in another 20 years. And you know, that makes it a lot more impactful in, okay, so what do we do to make sure that that experience, that going down to the docks, we can still do that in 20 years. So how do we do that? Okay, let's find a way. And that's at least how I've been trying to change that in my conversations, and I know people that I work with are trying to do that, but just like anything, systems and fields move really slowly, so hopefully this will kind of catch on and people will keep talking about it a bit differently than how we've been talking about it. So rather than talking about property laws, we talk about the intangibles that are difficult to figure out how to talk about them well, but once you do, are a lot more heavy, and you go home feeling them a lot more than talking about property laws.
I think that interestingly mirrors the general field of preservation too, because for so many years, and of course for good reason, because the actual architectural properties certainly need to be preserved for all sorts of important, significant architectural reasons, but there's much more a sense these days that what's really important and what truly makes a community historic or not is the people and the experiences that you have on those streets and within those buildings and in those public spaces. And that's really a turn that historic preservation has taken to begin talking about cultural heritage and the retention of small businesses, of native communities to certain neighborhoods, and really maintaining a sense of place that certainly includes actual historic buildings and historic corridors or historic green spaces, but really allows a community to thrive in the ways that are unique to that space, and using all sorts of different tools to make sure that those communities can continue to be there. So that's certainly one thing that Greenwich Village Society does as far as small businesses are concerned, and things like zoning that can maybe actually make a difference to make sure that communities can remain in their neighborhoods, as well as, of course, the more like architectural stuff that we can do. But that's definitely something that has taken hold in the preservation community. I know throughout the country, luckily enough, because I think everyone's starting to get that same sense.
Okay, for me and you, one more time. as a practical thing, I take direction from this organization, GVS. And if they make a big deal out of the resiliency office, it gets my attention. And if they see nothing there, then it's out of my mind within weeks. So for me, it's up to them. And in large measure, because it's an organization that takes action. So I have a lot of faith. You either grab it or it has no meaning.
Well, I think that's a good point, it's our responsibility and it's the responsibility of organizations throughout the city, I would think, including the city government itself. Pam is
And the
raising
new
her hand at the new school, to work together to talk about this stuff, and to, like you're saying, get people involved if that's what needs to happen, and that's certainly something Greenwich Village does about all sorts of things. So we've got these systems in place. If we don't agree with something that's going on down the street, we hold a rally. We know how to do this stuff, and yet we're not really doing it when it comes to climate change. And again, we're certainly not the only ones who aren't doing it, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing it. Tomorrow, yesterday, right now, that that's why it's great to get together to have these conversations, because you got to start somewhere. So, yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, by what he just said about getting more attention about it and not forgetting it, I've been to many programs that GVS has done, and I've been in programs that were packed from the front to the back, extra chairs needed, standing room only. And the next time you do a program about this issue, I hope that enough has been said and publicized, and this special mayor's office has been touting it out, so that this will be packed, because this just isn't enough people caring.
Right. No, it's a great point.
This is just unbelievable, because it's happening. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, not even, when we had a tornado here. When was there ever a tornado in New York that I ever heard of? And it's happening. And they're going all the way up from the north to the south of this country in huge amounts. I mean, 17, 18 at a time.
Yeah, I think
in one storm.
it's a good point that not only do we need to start talking about it, which we, as you're saying, we started the conversation today. I wish there were, 5, 6 times as many people as there are here to hear this talk right now. And so again, that's something that we have to work on, and hopefully something that, like Victoria's mentioning, as the national conversation continues to move forward and sort of shifts from something that seems very distant for people to something that seems a lot more relevant and a lot more community oriented, as people start to get that sense, and as they start to get used to organizations like us, like the New School, like all sorts of organizations around the city, as they start to get used to hearing this talk from us more often, as we're sort of like raising those alarm bells, people will start to show up. It'll start to seem like something that's just as important to them as any other thing that we're talking about on the monthly calendar. So yeah, more work to be done.
And if he's worth meeting, bring the resiliency
Oh,
officer
yeah.
next time.
That's a great
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, you definitely should. I would highly suggest asking, because I don't know, I'm sure he's busy doing something, but he's not doing a good job of publicizing it, and he should come out and talk to people, and I think it would be awesome to have him speak and have a conversation with him. And I'll say that getting more people into a room and having a conversation, I've seen that happen in places like Annapolis, where you had 10 people show up, and then now we had more people registered for Keeping History Above Water in Annapolis than we could have accommodated just from community members that were wanting to come. So it has grown from 10 people in a room to hundreds of people wanting to be part of a 3-day conversation about it, that we had to limit how many people could register. So it's that building of momentum if people care about it, if it's a, a decision that, you want to take on. Other communities have gone from people caring about climate change but not thinking about it, to actually figuring out, okay, tides are rising and our buildings are being flooded, what do we do now specifically for?
It just seems to me that it is something we talk about and many people feel removed from, but somehow, I don't mean to be alarmist in that my everyday life is particularly affected. However, someone, somewhere, in a public venue has to say, but it is happening now, and it will affect every single person around you. So, do something, listen, go, hear about it, find out what can be done.
Can I add my thought on it? It's a lot of good talk. We're having a very nice conversation. Are there any engineers, architects, city planners working on this?
Oh yeah, there are tons, but the historic preservation community, to my knowledge, is not involved in any of those, so I don't think that they're considering historic buildings or historic districts in those. But there are lots of people at the city level, Plan New York City, and all of the money that went into rebuild Sandy and redesign, there were hundreds of people that are engineers, civic, environmental engineers, city planners, urban planners that have been working on this for the past 3 years, and have really big ideas, right? Like the multi-billion-dollar seawall that they're thinking of building, to relatively small ideas like living shorelines and how to retrofit buildings. But again, to my knowledge, there's no seat at the table for historic preservation, so you guys are kind of left out over the past 3 years, but not a reason to not be involved going forward if you feel that historic districts should be there, because right now they'll be felt in the after effects of that, but they're not part of any of the first phases of any of the work being done now.
Well, I think the technical side is much more important and urgent, and going to cost a lot of money. I'm thinking of Venice. They've built a seawall which didn't do any good.
Yeah, so what I will say to that is that's why it's important to engage people like the mayor's office here and do work for what your specific historic districts and historic neighborhoods need, because each place, while we can learn from each other, is unique, right? All of our national landmarks are unique. The same goes for how to adapt, technically, all of these places. So what is working now in Miami Beach with all of their frontline historic buildings where they need to install pumps and raise the streets up, which they're currently doing at billions of dollars, will work there, and what they needed because of the porous soil underneath the island may not be the best option, probably is not the best option for New York. But that's why you need to come together with the city of New York, with the engineers that are already involved, and talk to them about lived experiences, about what you saw in things like Hurricane Sandy. So what went wrong? When a heat wave happens, what happens here? Because they don't know that, they don't live, but they're the ones who find the technical solutions, and borrowing from places like Venice, which they borrowed that from the Netherlands, right? They saw that it worked there and
yes,
tried to do it, but it didn't.
This is going to be my next question. Can you think of one country, except the Netherlands, where they are really successfully putting things in place? I'm really just thinking of technical things right now, because that has to come first.
So I'm not an engineer. I can't answer technical questions. The Netherlands is the leader. I would say that there are city level success stories. So places like Miami and Miami Beach they have technical solutions that are working, and they're putting a lot of money into finding those solutions. Places like London, understanding what to do there. They're also putting a lot of resources into that, and they have pretty robust plans for what needs to happen over the next 10 years. Europe is by far, continent-wise, the people to look to for technical solutions, but again, it needs to be developed on a local level.
Yeah. Did you see the storm walls at the subway station downtown?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a look at that the other day. Wow. Okay.
But yeah, but that's what you need, right? Those hard armorings, in addition to soft armoring, so soft engineering too. You need a combination of both of those things to within the next 20 years, within the next 10 years, you need those things, because it's not just slow onset natural disasters like sea level rise, but we will see another Hurricane Sandy. I'm sure of it. So, and you need barriers.
I have a quick question. I came in a little late, so I might have missed this, but are there government folks, like, for each neighborhood, preservation folks, or no?
Meaning, like, is there someone
Like
at the government level
Yeah.
for Greenwich Village and then also for Chelsea and then also for?
Yeah.
No.
No?
No. There is a department that handles housing and also handles preservation, and then there's a commission, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, which is the government body that handles both the landmarking of new buildings and new districts, as well as the regulation and the treatment of existing landmarks and existing historic districts. They're citywide, they do all 5 boroughs, and what they are essentially doing is fielding requests, applications for all sorts of changes to historic buildings, as well as additions to our list of current landmarks, both individual landmarks or districted areas. So they sort of handle everything, but they're not engaged in sort of like the active advocacy of citywide preservation. They're basically responding to applications.
Yeah, because the city planners and the engineers, it's like there's no connections, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and there's more of the city planning has more of like a robust advocacy role and sort of like a strategic role in the city in a way that I would say historic preservation really lacks, at least from my own experience, and I'm certainly not an expert, but
That's more for future planning, but just around and not preserving.
right, yeah, I think it's a bit of like a disconnect between the way people think about preservation and think about planning, and the way that's sort of, yeah, I know, that's where that resilience officer can come into play. But yeah, it's an interesting question that there's not really, there's not a dedicated advocate who should be, or who would be, I think, calling up this resilience officer and saying, we need to talk about this neighborhood and
I
this
mean, it's crazy about places like New York, that landmarks are places like, wherever, Jackson, Square over there, is that all privately funded? I mean, the preservation of these places certainly can't all be privately funded.
Right, and that's not to say that there wouldn't be potential public funds for a preservation project, but more that there's not an officer for the historic preservation of these neighborhoods, if that makes sense. But I think, like Victoria mentioned, at some point there are grants and other things that we can certainly be applying to, and there are government dollars certainly in the idea of preservation, but
Like when they moved whatever in Washington Square Park over like 2 inches, and it took, I don't know, 2 years. I mean, money had to be better spent.
yeah, right, I don't know the particulars of all that stuff, and it's probably much more convoluted than we could, even get to today, but, yeah, it's a good point. I think, is that it? No more questions from anyone? All right, well, I just want to thank everyone here, of course, and also thank Victoria again so much for the wisdom and the advice and the tips. And one thing, I do want to mention, we talked a lot about all these different resources that are available online. And so what we will definitely be doing tomorrow is sending everyone who is here, everyone who signed up online, we've got your email addresses. So what we'll be doing tomorrow is sending out an email. It'll have Victoria's presentation in it. It'll have a video of what you just experienced. It will also have, Victoria, as long as we can coordinate this, all of the links that we've been talking about today. So the game and the plan about the years and the photos and all that stuff, we can post or include all that stuff in the email so that you can just have it all right there.
Resiliency.
Yes, yes. And I'll post a photo of him with his home address. And I'll use that however we want. No, but that, we'll definitely be looking into that. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And I actually did want to say one more thing to your point about attendance here. I think one other really easy thing that we can all do is not only attend one of these events when we see them, but like go home and tell your neighbors and your friends and your family about this program. We don't have to wait until we're able to do the next program before we can start working. So I know I'm certainly encouraged to begin these conversations much more often than I was before, and that's, I think, one easy way that we can all take a step to get more people engaged and hopefully get a lot more bodies in the seats the next time we do something like this. So that's always encouraging to have something that's, I think, that easy that we can do. Again, thanks so much, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.